welcome everyone to this week's Come Follow Me discussion. This week we're going to be talking a little bit about Doctrine and Covenants 124, which is a pretty big section, and I'm definitely looking forward to. With that being said, I'll turn the time over to Carl, who's going to lead the discussion tonight.
Thank you, sir. So our topics for tonight, I've got some church news items I want to present, and then I want to ask you for your follow him favorites. We're going to talk about malaria, proxy baptisms, John C. Bennett, and temples. This section 124 deals with a lot of different people. So I want to remind everybody that you can get a short bio on each individual in the Doctrine and Covenants by searching through in the Doctrine and Covenants historical section, in the resource section. Just even type in their name and it will give you a short bio. And it goes through and gives out a bunch of information that if you're ever interested in the name, the history behind the name, it's there available for you. So don't be afraid to use it. Does anybody have a follow him favorite, a scripture, a story, anything that you would like to discuss before I jump into some of the things that I have?
Maybe starting verse 23, starting to talk about this, this house for boarding, which is kind of what you've mentioned. And he speaks to, it being a good house worthy of all acceptation. Basically he's talking about being nice and making it this really nice place for outsiders or other people. And I just found it interesting, given the context that they've, all this suffering that they've gone through. And I feel like my first thought wouldn't be to invite those same people back.
The natural man would kick in.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just found it, I see the wisdom behind this, but I just found it impressive that they had the faith to actually do that and to open it up and, be accepting to outsiders, even, understanding the risk that they might still be persecuted, just like they were before.
Moving along, I want to talk about some swampland. So they get Nauvoo, well, it was called Commerce, but it's not doing well because you remember the Panic of 1837. Well, there was a local bank failure in 1839 in the region. And so this land was dirt cheap. But of course, it was extremely swampy. And of course, that caused huge problems. It caused malaria. They didn't understand what malaria was. Malaria was first described in 1740 by an Italian doctor who put two words together, male and aria, or bad air, together and made malaria. But it wasn't the air, and we know that today. It was because of the mosquitoes. But back in the day, they thought it was bad air. Here's a statement from Joseph Smith, who says, all those persons who are not used to living on a river or a lake, a large pond of water, I do not want you to stay on the banks of the river. Get away to the lower part of the city, back on the hill, where you can get good well water. He knew it had something to do with the water, but he didn't know that it was the mosquitoes. But it's interesting because even today, you find those people who are like mosquito magnets and other people who repel mosquitoes. They set up a system where they start draining this excess water that's over there. And of course, the 70s got the enviable task. There were 35 quorum of 70s who did the ditch digging for the draining. And there was a BYU engineering perspective that was done that talks about how they were able to lower the water. And it's all very interesting if you ever wanted to go into it. But then if you look at this chart, this showed you the seasonal deaths and what happened because of malaria. So the August, September, this was after the ditch digging happened. And so this is when it was reasonably under control. And based on this chart and based on what I could discover from the population, the deaths were about 30 in 1,000 from malaria. So about 3% of the people died. And so the best business in town was the guy making coffins. Sister Black was talking about it. She's a professor, emeritus professor, and a historian. And she said there were newspaper articles, advertisements that said, come in now and get measured before it's too late. Supplies limited. You don't want to pop off and then not have any lumber for you. So it was very interesting. So the undertakers, the coffin makers were doing a booming business at the time. Then you know that there were a lot of famous stories, and the most famous one being where one day Joseph Smith got up and then started this parade around where he got the brethren together, healed them, and they went around and healed all kinds of different people and saved many, many, many people who had malaria in that first year. I don't know if this story is as well known. There was a man who came to Joseph and asked him if he would go out about 3 miles and heal two of his small children who were twins about 3 months old, who were sick nigh unto death. The interesting thing here is that was a non-member who requested it. And it was on the day that Joseph had just completed this circuit. But going around and blessing many, many people is extremely draining. And so Joseph was extremely tired. After hesitating a moment, he turned to me. You go with this man and heal his children. At the same time, giving me a red silk handkerchief. And after you've laid hands upon them, wipe their faces with it, and they shall be healed. As long as you keep that handkerchief, it shall ever remain as a league between you and me.
Well, the Savior did something like that, didn't he?
Yeah. The Savior didn't always have to be there. Different people are at different faith levels, and sometimes they need their faith increased and raised a level. And so the Lord will accommodate that. And in this case, I think with the handkerchief, Joseph couldn't come, but in order to raise the level of faith for this non-member who asked for a blessing on his children, he sent a representative with his handkerchief. And that's what helped him, and those children were healed. Now, why have I gone into this malaria and this death and all that kind of morbid stuff? Death was very, very common at this time. You look at Emma, who lost 5 of her 11 children. It was not that uncommon for a woman to lose half her children before the age of 5. The reason I bring this up is because death was constantly on their mind. And here they are partaking in the gospel of Jesus Christ, the restoration of the church. And what are they thinking in the back of their mind? What about my children who died? What about my parents who died without the gospel? What about my great-grandparents? What about all these people since the time of Christ that have passed away? And so then this, of course, was working on Joseph's mind as well, because he had had that dream previously about Alvin being in the celestial kingdom, and he's thinking, how did he get there? And so this death was constantly on their mind. And here they are in Nauvoo, and all these people are dying, and these families are being broken up. And Joseph was often asked to speak at a funeral, and there were many funerals. One in particular that he attended on August 15th, 1840, was with his good friend Seymour Brunson, who was a bodyguard for Joseph Smith, who had an illustrious life, but very short, only 41 years old when he died. And Joseph begins to explain to the people. He starts off with 1 Corinthians 15:29 and talking about baptisms for the dead. He went on to say that people could now act for their friends who had departed this life, and that the plan of salvation was calculated to save all who are willing to obey the requirements of the law of God. He went on and made a very beautiful discourse. He also addressed an individual, a widow in the audience. Her name was Jane Nyman, and she had recently lost Cyrus, her son. After his talk, she was baptized for and in behalf of her son, and this was the first baptism by proxy in the modern era. Now, at the same time, I want you to realize Joseph Smith Sr. had just passed away as well. He had been ill since Missouri, and then he gathered his family around him. He gave everybody a blessing, and then he said he saw Alvin, and then he said, I'm only going to live a few more minutes, and then he straightened himself up in bed and then promptly died within 5 or 6 minutes. So death is very prevalent. It's everywhere around them. And Joseph is churning this over in his mind. And after he gave the funeral talk, we have this. The prophet set the pattern of baptism of the dead. He went into the Mississippi River and baptized over 200. Then the apostle and other elders went into the river and continued the same ordinance. Hundreds were baptized there. And then I guess we should thank Sister Kimball, because she was a very good historian. She wrote many things down. In October, 34-year-old Sister Kimball wrote a letter to her husband, Heber C. of the Quorum of the 12, and she said, President Smith has opened a new and glorious subject, which has caused quite a revival in the church. She said to Heber, who was serving his second mission in Great Britain, the subject of Joseph Smith's teaching on baptism for those who hadn't had the opportunity in their lifetime. Joseph has received a more full explanation of it by revelation. It is the privilege of this church to be baptized for all their kinsfolk that have died before the gospel came forth. She celebrated the revelation that in doing these proxy baptisms for deceased family members, we act as agents for them and give them the privilege of coming forth in the first resurrection. Now, this was astounding doctrine that turned the Christian doctrine on its head, because everybody else was preaching, if you haven't been baptized, you're damned. That's it. You're done. In any case, Wilford Woodruff says, Joseph Smith himself went into the Mississippi River one Sunday night after meeting and baptized 100. I baptized another 100. The next man, a few rods from me, baptized another 100. We were strung up and down the Mississippi baptizing for our dead. Why did we do it? Because of the feeling of joy that we had to think that we in the flesh could stand and redeem our dead. And then we receive section 124. For a baptismal font there is not upon the earth, that they, my saints, may be baptized for those who are dead. For this ordinance belongeth to my house, and cannot be acceptable to me only in the days of your poverty, wherein you are not able to build a house unto me. What occurs is there's an emphasis put on having a temple, because rightly so, the temple is a place for these ordinances to be done. In General Conference, October 1841, Joseph says, there shall no more baptisms for the dead until ordinance can be attended to in the Lord's house. Now, they were building the temple, and the first story was up, but it wasn't anywhere near complete. So what did they do? They, within 1 month, they carved out a wooden baptismal font, and on November 8th, they dedicated this wooden baptismal font so that they could keep doing baptisms, because they were no longer able to do them in the river. And it was really not a very good baptismal font. Historically, we found out that it was leaky. They had to hand cart the water there. It was stinky and smelly because they didn't have everything the way set up the way it should be, but they still came, and they were way behind because there were a whole bunch of baptisms that were done that hadn't been recorded, that had to be redone, and there were lineups, but still they lined up so that they could participate in this saving ordinance. And it had a huge, tremendous effect on the people. And of course, the temple that they had previously never had a baptismal font. They had their washings and their anointings, but now this temple was like a step up. And then Joseph starts explaining to some of the leading brethren other things that are going to happen in the temple. And of course, Joseph Smith dies before the temple is completed, but he makes sure that the knowledge that he has is passed on. And we'll talk about that next week a little bit more in depth. But I just wanted people to understand that this idea of saving ordinances for their family was electrifying. It was thrilling. It caused this dynamic thing to occur within the church, and it spread everywhere. It spread all the way to England. When they were asking for donations for things, people were donating from everywhere so they could get the temple done, so that they could get these saving ordinances completed. And I think sometimes in our modern life, we get so wrapped up that we forget the importance of the temple and some of the ordinances that go on there. Maybe we don't have to sacrifice in the same way that they did, but the Lord is asking from us a different kind of sacrifice. Another thing that was interesting is that the original presentation of the endowment, and I want to make sure that we differentiate between what the endowment is, but sometimes the presentation of the endowment changes. So now you go and we use technology and you can be presented the endowment in the temple in a very short time period. When the first endowments were done, they took the better part of a day to go through the endowment. The presentation took the better part of a day, whereas now you can do it in an hour and a half.
I just have like one comment. I find it interesting to see the contrast in excitement levels that they had back then for, going in and doing these ordinances, specifically, the baptisms, compared to what I would consider are my excitement levels. I honestly can't remember the last time I did a baptism in the temple. That we've got youth that typically help out with that. It just makes me think about, why such a change in excitement level. I know back then it was new and it could just seem like old news to us now, but I feel like it's important for us to remember, kind of like what you were saying, Carl, that maybe we shouldn't be taking this for granted, and try to remember how exciting this should be and motivating, to get to the temple and prepare for the temple, things like that.
Your comment is very valid. And I'll use an analogy from war. the first thing that you want to do is disrupt communications if you're going to go to war with someone. And so the first thing that Satan does for us is jam us with all this other stuff so that we get lost in what's important. And I think that's really what's going on. There's so much available to us today that we get lost with what should be exciting and important.
So these were loved ones that they missed and they knew and they cared about. I mean, I've had loved ones that have passed away, but most of them had already been baptized. And certainly when I had the opportunity to do temple work for an ancestor that I personally had met and known, my motivation was much higher. But when we don't know them because they come out of the records and they're some distant relative, the motivation isn't there. But they didn't have families, history work back then. These were people that they knew and cared about and were relieved to find out that they could be redeemed.
Yeah. One of the most tender things that I read this week was when Emma Smith found out about this. One of the first things she did was get baptized for her father. When they left New York, Emma never saw her family again. That was it. And, they passed away. And so the first thing to her mind was just what you said. I have to save my father. And so that's what she did. She was baptized for him. And of course, death was so prevalent. The malaria, typhoid was tremendously vicious at this time because of bad water. They had lost all kinds of people in Missouri. It was just on their mind completely. A lot of people would lose their family members just through the natural process of childbearing. I was reading the journal of a gentleman just the other day who was on his fourth wife, not from divorce, because his first three died. This was a very common theme. And so the people were thrilled to be able to, and then we're going to get into this in the next few weeks when we talk about eternal marriage and sealings and those types of things. This was a tremendous thing for the people. The temple becomes a huge, important thing. And now you understand why they would sacrifice, why they would live in a tent for 2 years in the winter so that they could donate everything to get the temple done, because they wanted to be united with their families forever.
As a convert, when I came to do my own family history, there was a lot of work to be done. I was privileged to be baptized on behalf of my father, who never joined the church, who I loved dearly, who was very close to me, an excellent man, a good father. And so, Jesse, that was very, very personal. I think that's the difference. Maybe I don't know if you come from a long line of members and a lot of the work has been done, maybe that's a bit of a disadvantage. But as a convert, I just fill my bucket with names and go to the temple or put them on temple file, and it's joyous. Baptism for the dead is a glorious doctrine.
I think that kind of nails it on the head. It's I'll be honest, I've struggled to do family history work, and I don't want to make this an excuse, but I feel like probably one of the main reasons is because I haven't had to. I've got some family historians in my family, and a lot of our work is done, so it doesn't feel like it's as pressing when I'm trying to find these names for people that I just have no idea who they are or how closely I am actually related, or things like that.
Jesse, as well, there's a time and season for everything. Right now, you've got kids crawling all over, and you've got to worry about making a living, and you've got to change diapers, and it's a different time for you. So,
but they still, they say, family history shouldn't take that long, just to do a little bit here or there.
I'll give you a secret. You can do indexing for like 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Again, it's that spark that I feel like I need to get into it a little more, or I don't know. It's again.
And even as a younger member, I wasn't motivated to do it. It's just as I've got older and the clock is ticking, I've caught the spirit.
It's because we're going to have to meet them face to face soon, and we got to make sure that. What were you doing? Yeah, turn Netflix off. Get in there. I want to do a little quick history here, because 2 years have gone by since the last revelation. And this next part that I want to talk about, you need to understand what's happening. In section 123, he's told by the Lord to gather all these testimonials. And he does. Of all the people and all the land they lost, and they've done a calculation, it's about $2.4 million that they've lost. And so Joseph takes a group of people and goes to Washington, D.C., and tries to present the case first to the president and then to the House of Representatives, and is declined. And so he comes back rather dejected. And when he does come back, at the same time, the 12 apostles have all left and they're gone to England on the mission. Then he gets this letter from a guy named John Bennett, who is very accomplished. He's been in politics. He's a teacher, professor. He's a doctor. He's very accomplished in the things of the world. And the people that are normally around Joseph supporting him are gone. Some have fallen away. Some are sent on missions. Some have passed away. There isn't a lot of local support. And so when this man writes to him, I hope to remove myself to commerce and unite myself with the church. I believe I'll be happy with you. I have many things to communicate. Please write me. And there's this eager, educated man who says to him, I'd like to come. And so Joseph says, come and partake of the poverty of Nauvoo freely. I mean, it's a work in progress. So come on down. We could use your help. And so John comes. Now, you have to understand a little bit about John C. Bennett. He was very astute. He recognized that there was some untapped political potential here in Illinois with the members of the church, and that he could exploit it. And he was very good at exploiting situations. And what he would do is he was moving from place to place to place till he wore out his welcome, and then he moved to the next place. And this was not like it is today, where you could pick up the phone, you could do a search on the internet and find out about people. They didn't know that John was this wolf in sheep's clothing. And so he comes to Nauvoo and he becomes this secular aide de camp. He's able to take away from Joseph Smith all of the mundane, regular governmental people things that have to get done. And he does it. And he's a supreme actor. And of course, Joseph's very trusting. And Joseph trusts that he is doing what's best for everyone, when in fact he's not. Emma was a little bit more discerning. Emma thought that he was a sycophant. And then I looked at that word, and I better look that up. And so I did. It's a person who attempts to gain advantage by flattering influential people or behaving in a servile manner. And so around Joseph Smith, Emma said that he was extremely helpful. But when Joseph was not in the area, he was his regular self. So Emma never really trusted him. I think everybody knows the story of John C. Bennett. He is voted in as the mayor. He is also influential in several other areas. And then his baser nature takes over. He's had to leave other areas because of what he had done immorally with other women. And he begins to prey on the women in the area and talking about spiritual wifery. Now, we're going to talk about this more in context later on in the next few weeks when we get into celestial marriage and plural marriage. But it was kind of hush-hush at the time, and it was only taught, the idea of plural marriage was only taught to a very few select people. But there was a rumor mill going on. And so John made use of this rumor mill. And because he was high up in government, he said that, he was authorized by Joseph Smith, and that people didn't necessarily have to be married. They could be spiritually married. And so he took advantage of many women. When Joseph became aware of it, there was a Relief Society meeting in which Joseph explained to them that he wanted people to come forth, and he was shocked at how many women came forward to describe what had happened with this spiritual wifery. And so then Brother Bennett is excommunicated. He actually comes back to Joseph and pleads with him to not make it known and to forgive him. But so many people keep coming out of the woodwork to tell Joseph about what's going on that he's excommunicated. And so John C. Bennett just goes away and is quiet, right? No. He goes on a speaking tour and he writes a book, and he says the first presidency gave him access to their secret societies and enabled him to be familiar with all the doings and the designs. And he just lies through his teeth to all the people. And he is very responsible for turning up the heat and what's going to happen ultimately in Carthage. It's sad, but true. Oftentimes, members of the church who are disassociated with the church, who sin and don't repent, end up making it just miserable for the rest of the members of the church. And that's exactly what happens.
Having read about John C. Bennett's life, it's one that's always puzzled me, because here we have the prophet with the gift of discernment, yet it seems that his wife, she got it quickly. John C. Bennett was such a wicked, deceiving man. I would have thought Joseph
would have picked up on it
straight away.
Yeah, no, but I read up on this quite a bit because it intrigued me. And apparently he was an excellent actor. And when Joseph was anywhere nearby, he was a completely different person. And so the reason that Emma picked up on it was because when Joseph was gone, then John reverted to his regular self. And so she could see almost like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of a thing that was going on. But the thing that I considered is, why does the Lord let this happen? Why doesn't the Lord speak to Joseph Smith and say, hey, you got to watch this guy? What I've come to after reading quite a bit about it is that the Lord needed some things done. We needed the Nauvoo Charter. We needed the university set up. We needed all these governmental things done, and there was no one else to do it. And John was given the opportunity by the Lord to straighten out his life and use his talents for good, which he did to a certain degree, but then he got sucked into this baser desire that he had.
I was just going to say, I've heard that question quite a few times where, like, why, if we have inspired leaders, how is it that these bad people get into leadership positions in the church, or, things like that? I'm not giving any specific examples, but my response has always been that ultimately everyone's got their agency. So it's up to everyone has different challenges, different temptations, I guess, or whatever. So for all we know, John, like you were saying, Carl, John, he could have had good intentions, or, the Lord gave him this opportunity to improve and to make a good difference or a good change. But ultimately he has his agency and makes his decisions on his own. But I know that doesn't fully answer the question is why didn't Joseph figure this out sooner? Why wasn't Joseph guided? But I feel like, kind of like you were saying, Carl, there's learning opportunities here, right? So the members also probably learned a lot from him as well. A lot of, from his mistakes, trusting people just because they're in government, or, things like that. There may be purpose in all of this. We shouldn't be asking, why did you allow it? But what can we learn from it, maybe? Or I don't know.
Jesse, I think you're absolutely right. There's a jigsaw puzzle here, and the Lord is able to use, even when we do something wrong or something bad, to fit it together to make it all come out good in the end. And of course, don't neglect the idea of the atonement of Christ and all that can fix as well. But ultimately, John can't go before the Savior and say, hey, you didn't give me a chance. You shut me down.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the argument can be made too, just building on this question, the Lord could have guided Joseph Smith to avoided all of the calamities that he went through and all the trials and tribulations, not just this one, but that's, that's not how he operates, right?
We could go back to the early sections in the 40s and say, okay, from New York, we're going to Utah.
Well, even losing the manuscript from the Book of Mormon, right? He had to. I think Joseph Smith had to learn and develop. He had to learn these lessons, and he was given Emma. Emma could have. Maybe he didn't listen to Emma. We need to listen to our wives, right?
Maybe that was the thing that he needed to pick up on sooner. Notice the date here. This is 1894. This is from George Q. Cannon. I don't know if you know anything about George Q. Cannon, but he shot from the hip, and if you got in the way, you got shot. So this is what he said. I believe that our endowments are too easily obtained. This is 1894. Men and women go to the temple who do not understand or value the precious blessings. These blessings become so common that people do not value them or don't know how to use them. When the prophet Joseph first communicated that the Lord had revealed to him the keys of the endowments, I can remember the great desire there was on every hand to understand something about them. When the prophet would speak about his desire to complete the temple in order that he might impart unto his fellow servants that which God had delivered to him, a thrill went through the congregation. This was valued beyond price. A man that could go in and get his endowments was looked upon as though he had received some extraordinary blessing, something akin to which the angels received. And it was estimated in value in that way. How is it now? Again, this is 1894. How is it now? There is a complete indifference, and may be said in relation to that. Now, note this: the young people go there stupid, with no particular desire, only to get married or go on a mission, without realizing the character of the obligations that they take upon themselves, or the covenants that they make, and the promises involved in taking those covenants. I will admit that when I went and got my endowment when I was 18, I went there stupid. And I was a studious person who, I carried Mormon doctrine around with me. But still, in relation to what happened on that day when I took out my endowment, I was stupid. I was not prepared. And some of this goes back to what Rod talked about earlier today in our session, that we're not taking advantage of all the things that are available to us today. If you go on the internet, if you go to the handbook of instructions, there's all kinds of information now about going to the temple. There are all kinds of videos that are available that we can teach. And I'm suggesting now that we do not teach our children, our grandchildren. We seem to be afraid to speak about what happens in the temple. Now, there are some things that we're cautioned about in the temple that we shouldn't speak about, and that's fine. But there is a ton of stuff that needs to be discussed so that people understand when they go to the temple for the first time, what's going to happen, what an endowment is, what a blessing and an anointing is. All of those things are in the scriptures. There are videos. It talks about what's going to happen at your temple wedding, what's going to happen in the endowment. It talks about the clothing. That there are lots of tools available for us to use to teach our families. And I think you can't start too early. We need to get the level of education for what happens in the temple. We need to get it to be elevated substantially more than it is today.
There's the element of faith as well, right? It's not expected that we're going to know everything going into that. I feel like, to say that we are stupid is a bit of a harsh statement.
Well, that's canon.
Because and understanding that, but similar to you, Carl, I went in for the main purpose that I was preparing for my mission, but it's like I went in with good intentions. It was an act of faith, even though I didn't fully understand it. I knew it was something that I needed to do, but I would argue that there is this faith side of it that we need to make sure we take on and understand that we're not going to understand everything right away, but commit to learning as we progress. I think that's kind of the key.
I don't put the blame on the youth, the first temple goers. In my experience, and I'm being really candid here, maybe canon-like, but what I found is it's really with the leaders and those that are teaching the youth, and sometimes the parents. I mean, what I discovered that happens way too much, and this is when I was young as well, and that is, it's like we don't teach the importance of the endowment. We teach youth that they're supposed to get married in the temple. We teach the young men and young women are getting to be more and more to go on missions. And then, but it gets taught like this: is okay. Yep, you got to do all this stuff to get ready for your temple marriage. You got to do all this stuff to get ready for your mission. Oh, and by the way, you also have to take out your endowments. Otherwise you can't do it. But there's no talk about preparation for the endowment. Whereas, actually, the endowment is way more important than the mission or even the temple marriage, really, I would argue. And yet it's downplayed for the youth. It's like a step towards going on a mission. It's like going and buying two suits, that's where we're falling down. Let's put it that way, because we're not teaching the youth. And you know what I used to say to the youth? I still do that. I did this just about a week ago in seminary. I would talk to the youth about, the saving ordinances. And I would say, you've done baptism. How long did that take? They're like, oh yeah, maybe half a minute. How long did it take to get confirmed? Yeah, well, about a minute. Okay. You know how long it takes to do an endowment? It's about 2 hours. So can you imagine how much more important the endowment is, because it's 2 hours long compared to your baptism, which took probably a minute. And so I just even to try to get them thinking about,
That's awesome, Rod. I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate all your comments today. Those are awesome things, but I'm not trying to say that somebody's stupid. But what I'm saying is that we need to elevate our
Yes.
knowledge a little bit. We need to emphasize a little bit more what's going on. We don't need to be afraid to talk about what happens in the temple. There are some things that are sacred that you can't discuss, but that's fine. But there's a lot that's already in the scriptures that you can use. The whole idea of the endowment, or the presentation of the endowment, is one of knowledge. And we should take every opportunity to teach our kids, our grandkids, our great grandkids, every opportunity we can about the importance of the temple.
I went to the temple for my endowment in the early 70s, and it was in the era when everything was a big secret, and there was no temple preparation classes or anything like that. But I remember going through and taking it very seriously, and I look back now and I'm proud of myself that I took it seriously. And I remember also an older gentleman going through it for the first time, and he was making jokes in flippant comments, and I remember thinking, you're not doing this right. But I look back as a younger man, and because as you brethren have just mentioned, the endowment is a phenomenal contract with deity.
I appreciate everyone's comments. I think that was a pretty good discussion tonight. Hopefully we can leave this, inspired to study this material a little deeper, go to the temple a little more often, do a little more family history. Say thanks for tuning in. Again, quick reminder, give this YouTube a like, or this podcast a follow, just to help spread the word. So thanks everyone.